The moment justice went silent. Congresswoman Crockett, how do you justify such blatant hypocrisy to this court and to the American people? That was the moment Justice Amy Coney Barrett, cloaked in power, protected by robes, propped up by privilege, tried to humiliate a black woman on national television. Inside the Supreme Court chamber, you could hear the silence scream. This wasn't about law. It was about putting a woman of color in her place. It was a setup, a trap, a takedown. But Jasmine Crockett didn't cower. She rose, not with anger, not with fear, but with fire, facts, and the very Constitution her critics claimed she was betraying. What unfolded next wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. Receipts were pulled, precedents were cited, and by the end of it, the judge who threw the first stone was the one retreating. This wasn't just a hearing, it was history being rewritten in real time. She walked into that courtroom knowing exactly what they planned to do. The marble walls, the red velvet seats, the polished silence. It was all part of the trap. And at the center of that trap sat Justice Amy Coney Barrett, cloaked in black robes, flanked by legal tradition, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The case was supposed to be about voting rights. It became something else entirely. It became a stage, a showdown, a warning. Barrett's eyes locked on Representative Jasmine Crockett, a freshman black congresswoman who had dared to introduce a bill that would redraw the map of American elections. Crockett had come to defend voting rights. Barrett had come to defend the system. Then, without warning, tradition broke. Congresswoman Crockett. Barrett's voice sliced through the chamber. How do you justify such blatant hypocrisy to this court and to the American people? A Supreme Court justice had just called out a sitting member of Congress directly, personally, viciously. Cameras caught it all. Reporters froze. Security shifted uneasily. Barrett didn't just cross a line. She erased it. It was a public ambush in America's highest court. And the target was clear. A black woman with power, voice, and a bill that scared the foundation of the conservative legal machine. For the folks watching, especially black elders who had lived through Jim Crow, voter intimidation, literacy tests, and broken promises, this wasn't just disrespect. This was a message. Sit down, stay quiet, know your place. But Crockett didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't back down. She rose, calmly, deliberately, like every step she took toward the podium had already been rehearsed in her soul. Court security moved to stop her. Chief Justice Roberts, visibly uneasy, hesitated, then nodded. Let her speak. And speak she did. Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Crockett began, voice firm, tone steady. And thank you, Justice Barrett, for your questions. I welcome the opportunity to respond directly, clearly, and constitutionally. The courtroom shifted. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't defending. She was reclaiming the mic. Because Crockett knew what they didn't expect. That a black woman could walk into the lion's den and make the lion look lost. She opened her folder. Her weapon wasn't emotion, it was evidence. Article 1, Section 4, Federalist 59, Shelby v. Holder, Marbury v. Madison. She laid them out like bricks, built a wall of legal clarity, and then invited Barrett to try and knock it down. Barrett tried, but with every rebuttal, Crockett came back stronger, sharper, smarter, cooler. And then she turned the page. She read aloud from Barrett's own law review article, quoted her word for word, used Barrett's past writings to unravel her present attacks. It was cold, surgical, precise. The chamber was dead silent. For older black Americans watching, who remembered the silence of courtrooms where their voices were never heard, this was more than legal theater. It was vindication. Because what they saw was this: a black woman in the highest court of the land, defending democracy with the very words of those who tried to discredit her. That's not a rebuttal. That's revolution. That's not just legal skill. That's ancestral memory. And Justice Barrett, she felt it. She leaned back, crossed her arms, frowned not in power, but in recognition. She had walked into that chamber thinking it would be easy. She didn't expect Jasmine Crockett to be ready. She didn't expect Crockett to fight fire with footnotes. She didn't expect to be outmatched, not by a congresswoman. and certainly not by a black woman who refused to bow. Barrett quoted the Constitution like a sword. Crockett held it like a shield. And the difference between them, Crockett actually read all of it. When Justice Barrett tried to corner her with Article 1, Section 4, the so-called Elections Clause, she expected confusion, she expected deference. What she got was a lesson. Because Crockett didn't come to react. She came prepared to teach. Justice Barrett, she began, her voice steady but rising. That very clause you reference includes this sentence. But the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations. She paused. Let it echo. That's not activist interpretation. That's not partisan spin. That's the literal text of the Constitution. And just like that, Crockett flipped the frame. The Constitution wasn't Barrett's weapon. It was Crockett's witness. She reminded the chamber and the nation that the founders foresaw this moment. Alexander Hamilton, Federalist 59, warned that leaving elections solely to the states would place the Union at the mercy of local interests. Crockett didn't just cite him. She channeled him. She quoted James Madison from the debates. She pulled historical records of Reconstruction lawmakers intentionally expanding federal power to protect black voting rights. She didn't make it emotional. She made it inarguable. Justice Barrett, she said, when state governments use power to suppress the very voices democracy depends on, Congress is not just permitted to act, it is constitutionally required to. Legal scholars sat stunned. Not because they hadn't heard these arguments before they had, but never like this. Not in the court. Not with this clarity. And never, from someone the court had clearly underestimated. This wasn't just a black woman quoting law. This was a descendant of disenfranchised Americans telling the Supreme Court what justice actually means. And she didn't stop at the founders. She moved forward to Marbury v. Madison, establishing judicial review, to South Carolina v. Katzenbach, upholding strong federal enforcement of voting rights, to Shelby County v. Holder, where protections were gutted on the promise that things had changed. Things have changed, Crockett said, but not in the way this court hoped. Instead of poll taxes, we have voter ID laws. Instead of literacy tests, we have precinct closures. The tools change, the intention doesn't. Barrett tried to pivot. Your legislation, she said, still applies a pre-clearance framework. This court found unconstitutional. Crockett smiled. That slow, knowing, black grandmama smile that says, I've been waiting for you to say that. She pulled out a document. Respectfully, Justice Barrett. It is not the same. This bill establishes new criteria, national, uniform, res neutral, based on contemporary data. We built this legislation to answer your ruling, not to ignore it. Reporters scribbled. Court watchers leaned in. Even conservative justices blinked. Crockett had anticipated every move, every line of attack, every gotcha, and she had brought receipts, not just metaphorically, but literally. When Barrett accused her of politicizing the court, Crockett read Barrett's own 2017 Law Review article, where she argued that precedent should bend to the Constitution, not the other way around. You wrote, a justice's duty is to the Constitution, not to faulty precedent. A feng. Crockett looked Barrett dead in the eye. I agree with you. That line hit like thunder. It wasn't defiance. It was alignment. Crockett wasn't here to destroy the court. She was here to remind it of its purpose, its power, and its limitations. The Constitution is not fragile, but democracy is, she said, her voice now deep, full. And when federal power is needed to protect the people's voice, this court must remember the people come first. No theatrics, no anger, just power, real power. The kind that doesn't scream because it doesn't have to. By the end of her remarks, Crockett hadn't just defended her bill. She had defended the very idea of constitutional justice with history, with logic, with grace. She didn't just walk into the Supreme Court. She walked into the pages of constitutional history, and the court would never look at her the same again. Just when the courtroom thought it had seen everything, Jasmine Crockett reached into her folder, again. And this time, it wasn't history. It wasn't theory. It was something far more dangerous. It was evidence. Real. Documented. Incontrovertible. She held it up, a printed email. One sentence highlighted in bold: model bills designed to ensure partisan advantage regardless of demographic voting patterns. The sender, a senior policy advisor at the Heritage Foundation. The recipients, lawmakers across more than 7 Republican-controlled states. The courtroom gasped, because now, the fight wasn't about potential overreach. It was about intentional suppression. Crockett didn't pose a. This was obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, she said. And it's not the only one. She flipped the page. 17 more communications. 70 more receipts. Each one exposing coordination between think tanks and state officials designing voting restrictions not to protect elections, but to manipulate them. They said the quiet part out loud. Our legal review suggests Justice Barrett's confirmation provides cover for Phase 2. We anticipate limited judicial resistance moving forward. Voter ID expansion likely to survive Supreme Court scrutiny. Barrett's name, in black and white, not as a bystander, as a green light. The temperature in the room dropped. Barrett's face tightened. Her composure cracked just slightly. Representative Crockett, she began. I had no knowledge of these communications. Of course not, Crockett replied. Calm, controlled. No one's accusing you of involvement, but we are showing why Congress must act. It wasn't personal. It was proof. The Voting Rights Restoration Act wasn't theoretical. It was necessary, urgent, because the game had already been rigged, and now the court was being used to certify the rigging. And for Black America, that wasn't a legal technicality. That was history repeating again. Justice Barrett. Crockett continued. Appendix E contains this message. We now have the votes on the court. The timing is right. Move fast. The court. Not the voters. The court. That line echoed across generations. Because Black elders watching knew what it meant. They had seen it with poll taxes, with literacy tests, with redistricting maps drawn in the dark. This wasn't just about ballots. It was about power. Power being used to silence. Power being used to shrink democracy one loophole at a time. And Crockett had every receipt. These aren't just strategy memos, she said. They are admissions. The liberal justices leaned forward. Even Kavanaugh looked uneasy. Barrett didn't speak. Couldn't speak? Crockett wasn't accusing. She was proving. This legislation wasn't partisan. It was protective. Protective of elders who waited 8 hours in line just to vote. Protective of students whose campus polling places were shut down without explanation. Protective of rural Black towns whose single drop box was removed weeks before Election Day. This was about stopping the slow suffocation of the Black vote. The Constitution doesn't ask Congress to wait until damage is done, Crockett said. It gives us the power and the duty to prevent it. And in that moment, it wasn't just about the court. It was about every Black grandmother turned away at the polls. Every ancestor who paid poll taxes with coins, scraped together from laundry shifts, every voice silenced, not by law but by design. Crockett was speaking for them. If we don't act now, she said, we betray not just the Constitution. We betray the generations who bled to make that Constitution mean something. The room didn't breathe. The moment wasn't legal. It was moral. This wasn't about partisanship. This was about protection. This was about proof. This was about a Black woman standing in the highest court of the land, doing what Congress should have done decades ago, telling the truth, documenting the truth, defending the truth. If you believe this is what Black America needed all along, say truth in the comments below. The courtroom didn't explode. It didn't have to. The silence said everything. Justice Barrett leaned back, hands folded tightly, her eyes scanning the printed emails. Emails that bore her name, like a political strategy line item. Chief Justice Roberts cleared his throat, but didn't speak. Justice Kavanaugh squinted at Appendix C, visibly unsettled. Justice Gorsuch stared forward, unmoving, but not unshaken. The court, once the place where Black voices were silenced, was now the place where a Black woman made the room go still. It was the shift, subtle, seismic, unstoppable, because in that moment, they knew. They had lost control of the narrative. Crockett had walked in as a congresswoman. She was now the conscience in the room. She hadn't just defended a bill. She had exposed a machine. And once exposed, that machine couldn't be unseen. 3 days later, Washington shifted. CNN opened its morning hour, not with a panel but with a full replay of Crockett's exchange. Fox News tried to spin the moment, calling it scripted political theater, but even their legal analysts admitted she came with the law. She came prepared. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow called it the most important moment for voting rights since the 1965 Act. She wasn't wrong, because it wasn't just the Supreme Court that heard Crockett. It was every voter who'd ever been told to wait, to prove, to fight just to cast a ballot. Social media lit up. Crockett Constitution trended within hours. Clips of her quoting Barrett's own article were shared 10 million times in 48 hours. Law students called her the professor the court didn't expect. And in a back room of the Capitol, Senator Chuck Schumer watched the clip on his phone and whispered, "She just changed the game." Across the aisle, things weren't calm. Republican strategists held emergency sessions. This wasn't supposed to be a problem. One aide muttered, "She wasn't even on our radar." Now, she was the radar. Barrett, meanwhile, faced a new reality. She had asked a question meant to embarrass. She had triggered a confrontation meant to dominate. Instead, she'd summoned a voice that didn't crack, and a record that didn't lie. Her chambers released no statement, but sources inside the court leaked to reporters that Barrett had reviewed all of Crockett's appendices twice. Justice Jackson, speaking at a law school event a week later, didn't name names, but her words were clear. Sometimes, the most constitutional thing we can do is listen, especially when the truth makes us uncomfortable. That wasn't commentary. That was a signal. The shift was real. For Black America, especially elders who had spent decades watching the court gut voting rights brick by brick, this wasn't vindication. It was revelation. "I never thought I'd live to see someone speak that truth in their house," said Gloria Sims, Bashar, of Selma, Alabama. She ain't asked permission. She walked in like she belonged because she did. Churches replayed Crockett's remarks after Sunday service. HBCU professors revised syllabi to include the full transcript. Law journals requested op-eds. Civil rights veterans called her our Thurgood. Crockett herself, she stayed quiet. No press tour, no victory lap. Just one tweet. "The Constitution belongs to the people. I serve the people." Inside the Supreme Court, something deeper happened. Barrett, who once saw herself as the immovable center of constitutional gravity, now faced a truth she couldn't dismiss. The Constitution wasn't just for the few trained in Harvard halls. It belonged to every citizen, brave enough to read it and bold enough to defend it. And Crockett had done both. She had shown the country what it looks like when preparation outwits position, when history outweighs headlines, when a woman raised in the fire of injustice walks calmly into the cold of the court and melts it with truth. That's not spectacle. That's shift. And the court felt it. 2 months later, the decision came. 63 pages, 6 justices in the majority, and a ruling that would reshape American democracy. The Supreme Court upheld the Voting Rights Restoration Act. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the opinion, but everyone knew it was Crockett's fingerprints on every paragraph. The ruling quoted Article 1, Section 4, the very clause she had recited under fire. It cited the Federalist Papers, quoting Hamilton's warning about unchecked state power, the very history she had unearthed. It referenced the Reconstruction Amendments and declared voting rights preservative of all other rights. But the most powerful line came in the majority's conclusion. The Constitution grants Congress the power to regulate federal elections not as a courtesy, but as a safeguard. When evidence suggests that state-level laws may function to suppress lawful voters, congressional action is not only constitutional, it is imperative. It was the sentence Black America had waited lifetimes to read. The shift was now law. The court had spoken, but history remembered who made it speak. In a rare concurring opinion, Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote, "Original public meaning sometimes requires us to recognize broader federal authority than we might prefer under modern federalism principles. The historical record indicates the framers intended Congress to have the final authority over federal election regulations." She didn't name Representative Crockett. She didn't have to. Every legal mind in the country recognized the influence. The court hadn't just ruled on the law. It had responded to a reckoning, and America responded back. At Morehouse and Howard, students studied the exchange, like scripture. At churches from Birmingham to Baltimore, Sunday sermons quoted Crockett like she was Coretta, like she was Ida, like she was one of our own, because she was in Selma. Elders gathered on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and prayed for John Lewis, for Fanya Lou, for all the voices that had fought to make the right to vote mean something. And then someone whispered. The court finally caught up to the movement. In the Capitol, her colleagues called it a Crockett moment. Cable news called it a constitutional landmark. But back in Texas, Jasmine Crockett stood before her constituents. No cameras. No script. Just soul. And said, "This wasn't my victory. It was ours. This law didn't just pass. It stood. And now, it protects your vote, not next year." Now, the crowd didn't cheer. They wept, because they knew what it meant. For the first time in a generation, their vote wouldn't be filtered through suspicion. Their voice wouldn't be muzzled by laws dressed up in bureaucracy. They had power, real power, and the country saw it. The New York Times ran the headline, "From the Courtroom to the Constitution, How One Woman Rewrote the Voting Rights Battle." Barack Obama posted, "What Jasmine Crockett did wasn't just defend a bill, she defended the democracy we promised, and too often delayed." Even her critics on Capitol Hill fell silent, because there are some moments that even politics can't spin. Moments when law bends toward justice, when legacy becomes motion, when the truth stands taller than fear. This was one of those moments. The ruling meant millions more would cast ballots without barriers. It meant every voter ID law, every registration purge, every last-minute polling closure would now face federal review. It meant black communities no longer had to beg for access. They had a statute to demand it. The law was clear. The court had spoken. But the people remembered the woman who made it listen. So if you ever ask what legacy looks like, it looks like a black congresswoman standing calm before a Supreme Court justice, armed with nothing but the Constitution and the truth. It looks like an elder in Mississippi, whispering, "I didn't think I'd live to see this." Like a student in Detroit saying, "That's the kind of leader I want to be." It looks like a courtroom that tried to break her, and instead broke open history. Congresswoman Jasmine. Latest news. She didn't just change the news, she rewrote the rules. And in the process, she proved something generations hoped was true. The Constitution still belongs to the people, especially the people who were once denied its promises. Especially us. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a generational turning point. In a single courtroom, against centuries of silence and erasure, one voice reminded America that the Constitution is not a weapon of exclusion, but a promise of inclusion. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She stood firm. She cited truth. She made the Supreme Court listen. And now, millions more Americans will vote without fear. Because a daughter of Black Texas made justice non-negotiable. But don't mistake this for the end. This is only the beginning. The Congresswoman Jasmine's latest news is not just that she changed the court, it's that she's changing us. She's reminded black elders that their marches mattered. She's shown young black voters what power looks like when it's prepared. She's taught this country, and the United States Congress' latest news proves it, that when truth walks into a room, even history has to shift. So we ask, where do we go from here? How do we protect what she defended? What does it look like when Africa rises with us? What kind of future will we build when we remember we've always been the builders? Because if this story stirred something in you, something quiet, something deep, don't scroll past it. Stay, sit with it, speak it forward. Say it in the churches, in the beauty salons, in the barbershops, on the porches. Tell the babies. We saw it happen. We watched one of ours stand before the law and change what the law would do. The Congresswoman Jasmine's latest news isn't just politics. It's legacy. It's power. It's proof. And if this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, stand, subscribe, because they silenced our voices long enough. Let's raise them louder than ever. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear. We rise still,